Drifter married the banker's widow for a bet. Her revenge became a town legend. The cards slid across the table like autumn leaves caught in a dying wind, each one carrying Jake Morrison's hope a little closer to the ground. 3 kings stared up at him from the felt, their painted grins mocking him with cruel delight. Across the table, Big Tom Hawley leaned back in his chair, smoke from his cigar curling into a devil's halo above his head. "Looks like you're cleaned out again, Morrison," Tom rumbled, his voice thick with whiskey and satisfaction. The other men chuckled, their faces glowing red in the lamplight, while outside, the October wind rattled the saloon windows like the restless dead demanding to be let in. Jake's hand trembled as he reached for his empty glass. The whiskey that had once burned his throat was gone, leaving nothing but bitter air and the ache of failure. His last $5 lay in the pot, swallowed by Tom's hand like everything else Jake had ever owned. "Got nothing left to bet?" Jake muttered, the shame in his voice heavier than the silence that followed. Tom's eyes glimmered like coins in the dark. He was a man who owned half the town and the souls of the other half. His fat fingers tapped the table in rhythm with Jake's racing heart. "There's always something left," Tom said, leaning forward. The laughter died. The room hushed. Even the piano in the corner fell silent, the notes hanging unfinished in the smoky air. Jake lifted his head. "What are you getting at?" "The widow Hartwell," Tom said at last, his words sliding into the room like a knife drawn slow. "Eleanor Hartwell. Big white house on Willow Street. Husband's been in the ground 6 months now." The men shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Jake's gut twisted. "What about her?" he asked, though his voice was low, as if afraid of the answer. Tom smiled then, oily, wide, and rotten with power. "I bet you can't court her and marry her in 3 months. Not you. A penniless drifter with a ragged horse and a cabin colder than a grave." The saloon went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. All eyes turned to Jake, measuring the kind of man he was or wasn't. "And if I do?" Jake forced the words out. Tom reached into his pouch and spilled silver onto the table. 100 shining coins tumbled forward, catching the lamplight like fallen stars. The sound of them striking the wood was the sound of temptation itself. 100 silver dollars. More than you've ever held in your sorry life. Jake stared. That kind of money could buy him freedom, land, a fresh start far away from this cursed town. It was everything he had ever wanted. Everything but his soul. "That's a woman's heart you're gambling with," Jake whispered, though the words fell weak, drowned out by the hungry gleam in the other's eyes. "That's a bet," Tom corrected. "Same as any other. You've got charm. She's got loneliness. That's all it takes." A murmur rippled through the men, some eager for the cruel sport, others uneasy, ashamed to be witnesses. But none looked away. Jake's hands shook as he pressed them flat against the table. He thought of Eleanor Hartwell. Graceful even in grief, her black dresses catching the light, her eyes deep and knowing. She was beauty untouched, like a sunset that humbled men who dared to look at it too long. "She'd never have me," Jake said, his throat dry. "Maybe not," Tom grinned. "But 3 months is a long time, and desperation makes men do miracles." The silver burned in Jake's vision. He closed his eyes, but the coins blazed there too, as if stamped against his soul. "It ain't right," he said hoarsely. "Right's got nothing to do with it," Tom answered coldly. "This is business." The room waited. The fire popped in the stove. Somewhere, outside, a dog barked in the dark. Jake could hear his father's voice, telling him once about honor, about respecting women. But his father was dust in the grave now. Honor didn't put bread on the table. 3 months, Jake said. Tom's hand shot forward, cold and heavy, clamping Jake's like the grip of death. 3 months, he echoed, sealing the devil's bargain. The saloon erupted in laughter and cheers. Glasses clinked, the piano groaned to life again, and Jake felt as if he were drowning in the noise. The coins vanished back into Tom's pouch, but their gleam lingered in Jake's mind, as sharp and deadly as original sin. An hour later, Jake stumbled into the cold night. The wind cut through him, sharp with the promise of winter. Above, the stars burned hard and bright, watching him with the eyes of God. He could not meet their gaze. At the hitching post, Dusty, his old, patient mare, lifted her head as he approached. Her dark eyes seemed to ask questions he could not answer. "What have I done, girl?" he whispered, laying a weary hand on her neck. She nickered softly, as if she knew, as if she mourned with him. He swung into the saddle, and the leather creaked like a coffin lid closing. The streets were empty as he rode past the church, the schoolhouse, the store, all places that taught men about right and wrong. The moon hung high above, a silver coin casting its cold glow across the town. At the end of Willow Street, the White House loomed. Light spilled from an upstairs window, warm and golden, where Eleanor Hartwell surely sat, keeping her lonely vigil. Jake stopped at the gate, staring up at that fragile glow. She was in there, untouched, unknowing, her heart whole. And he had just agreed to shatter it for money. Tomorrow, he would wash the shame from his face, buy flowers with borrowed coins, and knock on her door with a practiced smile. Tomorrow, he would begin the cruelest game of his life. Tonight, he rode home with the clink of silver still echoing in his ears, each note sounding like a piece of his soul breaking away. The morning sun cast long shadows over the graveyard, turning the frost on the grass into shards of glass. Eleanor Hartwell knelt before her husband's headstone, her black dress spilling over the ground like ink soaking into paper. In her hands, she held roses red as blood, the thorns biting her skin as if reminding her that grief was never gentle. Samuel Hartwell, beloved husband. The words were carved deep into marble, sharp enough to last for generations. But the man himself had been gone 6 months, buried beneath earth that still felt too fresh, too raw. "The autumn's come early this year, Samuel," Eleanor whispered, brushing away a fallen leaf from his name. "The maples turned just like you said they would." A shadow stretched across the grave, and she lifted her head. At the gate stood a man with his hat in hand, sunlight tangled in his hair like gold on wheat. For an instant, she thought he too was a mourner, someone weighted down with his own sorrows. Jake Morrison had risen before dawn, washing the dust from his skin in the icy creek. He'd combed his hair with nervous fingers, rehearsed lies in the warped mirror of his cabin window. But now, looking at the widow Hartwell, her grief etched deep and tender, every false word turned to ash in his throat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rougher than he meant. "Didn't mean to intrude." Eleanor rose, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled just enough to betray her. She was smaller up close, reaching no higher than his shoulder, but her presence carried a strength like a willow tree bending without breaking. "You're not intruding," she said softly. "I was only talking to someone who can't answer back." Jake's chest tightened with something he hadn't expected. "I lost my father 5 years ago. I still catch myself saving things to tell him." It was true, and somehow that honesty made the lie of his purpose feel even heavier. Eleanor's eyes, dark and searching, softened as though she'd glimpsed something in him worth trusting. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell," she said. "Jake Morrison." His name came out steady, but in his mind he could still hear Tom Hawley's laughter, cruel and echoing, like thunder before a storm. They walked back toward town together, Eleanor with her empty basket, Jake leading Dusty by the reins. The air carried the sweetness of wood smoke and dying leaves. Neither spoke for a long while, yet silence between them felt less like distance, more like a bridge being built. Jake tried to see her as Tom had framed her, a wager, a prize. But all he noticed was the heaviness in her shoulders, and how her fingers brushed her wedding ring when she thought no one was watching. "You're new in town," she said at last. "Drifted in a month back. Been taking odd jobs, trying to decide if I'll stay." Her gaze lingered on him, curious. "What would make you stay?" The question pierced him. He could have said land or steady work, but the answer that rose in him, unbidden, was the curve of her smile and the softness of her voice. He swallowed. "Haven't figured that out yet." Eleanor gave a small smile then, gentle, unguarded, and it struck him harder than any whiskey ever had. When was the last time someone had looked at him without expectation, without judgment? At her gate, she paused. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to put on a pot." Jake's mare flicked her ears, almost disapproving, but he tied her to the fence post anyway. His hands were steady, though his heartbeat thundered like a war drum. Inside, her kitchen glowed with warmth. Sunlight spilled through white curtains, and the scent of bread baking wrapped the room in comfort. Jake sat at the worn table, watching Eleanor move with the grace of a woman who belonged to a place, who had roots. He felt like a man who'd stumbled into a home he didn't deserve. She poured coffee into fine china cups painted with blue flowers. "Sugar?" "No, ma'am. Black's fine." They sat across from each other. Up close, grief showed itself in the faint lines around her eyes, in the way she held the cup as if drawing strength from it. She was young still, early 30s perhaps, but sorrow had aged her in ways laughter alone could heal. "You have kind eyes," she said suddenly, then flushed. "I shouldn't have said that." "Maybe you should," Jake replied quietly. And just like that, something fragile began to take shape between them. For an hour they spoke of small things. The autumn frost, the town, a book of poetry she'd been reading. She spoke of words the way other people spoke of food, like nourishment she needed to survive. Jake found himself wishing he had more to offer her than patched shirts and half-truths. When he left, she walked him to the door. Her fingers brushed his as she returned his hat, a fleeting touch that seared through him. "Thank you for the company," she said. "This house gets quiet." Jake tipped his hat and walked away. But long after he turned the corner, he could still feel her eyes on his back. That night, lying in his narrow bed, he saw her smile in the darkness. He told himself it was a job, a bet. Yet when he returned 3 days later with wildflowers in his hand, his heart betrayed him. "Thought these might brighten your table," he said, offering the meadow's yellow blooms. Her face lit like sunrise. "They're beautiful. No one's brought me flowers since." She touched her ring. "Since your husband," Jake finished gently. Her silence was tender, filled with memory. Samuel believed a woman should never go without flowers. Jake watched her place the wildflowers into a glass jar as if they were roses made of gold. Something in his chest cracked open, and he didn't know whether to fear it or follow it. Over the weeks, their lives intertwined. He chopped wood for her stove, repaired shutters, sat in her kitchen while she mended his shirts. She cooked meals that tasted like belonging. On Sundays, he walked beside her to church. On evenings, he listened to her dreams, of oceans of California, of a life not defined by loss. Somewhere between lies and truths, Jake found himself changed. Eleanor's laughter filled the hollowness inside him. Her touch softened edges carved by too many lonely years. When she looked at him, he saw not a gambler or drifter, but the man he could be. One evening, brushing Dusty's coat, Jake whispered, "I'm thinking of asking her to marry me." His mare snorted, stamping the earth, as if to remind him how it had all begun, with silver coins and shame. But the moment came anyway. On a November night, with snow gathering against the windows, Jake took Eleanor's hands across the table. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, his voice unsteady, "but I'd like to make this permanent. If you'll have me." Her eyes glistened like stars, brimming with tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jake." When he kissed her, it was redemption and ruin all at once. They set the date for Christmas Eve. Eleanor threw herself into the preparations with a happiness that broke him in ways he could not show. She altered her mother's wedding dress, spoke of their future with hope so bright it blinded him. And each night, alone in his cabin, Jake counted the silver in his mind. 100 coins. A cruel bargain. A lie waiting to detonate. As December's snow blanketed the town, pure and white, Jake Morrison prepared to marry the woman who had mended his heart. But in the shadows of his soul, he carried the weight of a bet that would shatter everything the moment truth clawed its way free. The church bells tolled like wedding songs on Christmas Eve, their voices drifting across the snowbound town. Inside the little church, candlelight flickered against the wooden beams, casting halos around the faces of neighbors who had gathered to witness a new beginning. Eleanor Hartwell stood before the mirror in the back room, smoothing the folds of her mother's wedding dress. The ivory silk had faded to cream with the years, but it carried the memory of vows spoken, promises kept. Her hands trembled as she fastened the veil Mrs. Patterson had arranged for her, the same veil worn by her mother and grandmother before her. "You look beautiful, child," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "Beautiful. Samuel would be smiling down on you." Eleanor touched the small gold locket at her throat, the one with Samuel's portrait inside. "Samuel," she thought, "forgive me if I've chosen too soon. Forgive me if I've chosen wrong." Through the walls, the congregation stirred. A shuffle of boots. A cough. Someone setting down a hymnal. Then the organ began to play. The preacher himself offered Eleanor his arm, and together they walked into the glow of lanterns and whispers. At the altar, Jake Morrison stood waiting, his hair combed neat, his hands steady at his sides. Only his eyes betrayed him, restless, shadowed by something Eleanor couldn't yet name. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Still, when she reached him, the smile she offered swept every question from her mind. Jake, for his part, felt his soul tremble as Eleanor came toward him in her candlelit gown. She was more than beautiful. She was salvation, forgiveness, a chance at the life he'd never thought he deserved. But the words he would speak, his vows, were born from lies. His lips would promise forever, while the truth crouched between them like a wolf waiting to strike. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered here today." The ceremony passed in a blur. Jake's voice shook when he pledged his vows, but Eleanor's did not. She spoke with the clear, steady tone of a woman who believed in love, who believed in him. When the gold ring slid onto her finger and their lips met in the kiss of husband and wife, Eleanor tasted joy, but Jake tasted both joy and salt. The sting of shame mixed with the sweetness of her tears. The celebration afterward was modest. Cake, coffee, the murmur of neighbors packed into Eleanor's parlor. The fire crackled, laughter rose, but Jake's gaze kept flicking to the door, half expecting Tom Hawley to step through and turn the whole evening to ash. Yet Tom never came. He was waiting, Jake thought, waiting until it would hurt the most. When the guests left and the house grew quiet, Eleanor lit candles in the bedroom. Jake lingered at the window, watching snow fall past the lamplight. "Are you having second thoughts?" Eleanor asked softly. Jake turned. She stood in her nightgown, her dark hair unpinned and flowing like ink down her shoulders. Worry touched her face.
"No," Jake whispered.
"Just thinking how lucky I am." She smiled at that, her hand finding his. "Samuel always said the best blessings come when you're not looking for them." For the first time that day, Jake let himself believe. But later, while she brushed her hair in the washroom, Jake reached for his coat draped on the chair. Something crinkled in the pocket. His heart lurched. The paper. The bedding slip. He pulled it free, intending to burn it at once, but the firelight revealed every damning word in Hawley's bold scrawl. Jake Morrison to court and marry Eleanor Hartwell within 3 months. Payment of 100 silver. The air left his lungs. He should have destroyed it long ago. Now, on this night of all nights, it lay in his hands like a loaded pistol. "What's that?"
Jake spun.
Eleanor stood in the doorway, the candlelight catching the question in her eyes. "Nothing," he stammered, shoving it toward his pocket. "Let me see it. Eleanor. Let me see it." Her voice carried no anger yet, only a quiet certainty that made Jake's hands tremble. Slowly, he placed the slip into her palm. Eleanor read. Once, twice. Her lips moved without sound. Then she lifted her eyes, and Jake watched the light in them gutter and die. "A bet," she whispered. "That's what I was to you. A bet."
"No," Jake pleaded.
"It started that way, but it's not that way now. I love you, Eleanor. That's the truest thing I've ever known." But Eleanor's face was crumpling into something he had never seen before. Not grief, but rage. Tears streamed hot down her cheeks, not of sorrow but betrayal. $100, she said, her voice a whisper sharp as broken glass. That's all I was worth to you. Eleanor, get out. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Don't you touch me, she said, steel hidden beneath her trembling. Don't you ever touch me again. The wedding ring she tore from her finger clattered to the floor and rolled beneath the bed. Jake felt his chest cave in. I do love you, he said, his voice ragged. She laughed, the sound shattering like glass. Love? You wouldn't know love if it bled for you. Samuel loved me. He gave me roses, not lies. You gave me a wager in a saloon. Her back turned, her figure framed in candlelight like a ghost in her own house. Goodbye, Mr. Morrison. Jake left. Boots in hand, coat on his arm, he stumbled into the frozen night. Behind him, the church bells struck midnight. Christmas Day. His wedding day. His funeral day. By morning, Eleanor's vengeance was swift. She had moved from neighbor to neighbor, her voice clear, her story sharp. By noon, the town knew the tale of Jake Morrison and the $100 bride. In the general store, faces turned from him. In the street, whispers followed him. At the saloon, the piano fell silent as he stepped through the doors. And there sat Tom Hawley, grinning, with $100 silver stacked neat before him. Well, well, Tom drawled, his voice carrying for all to hear. The bridegroom himself. You've done it, Morrison. Fair and square. Wagers won. There's your money. The silver gleamed in the lamplight. Jake stared, remembering the night his pride had chained him to this ruin. He had thought it fortune. Now it looked like blood. Keep it, Jake said. Tom barked a laugh. Keep it? Hell. This is more than you've ever seen in your sorry life. Jake turned and walked out into the snow, leaving Tom's laughter ringing in his ears like the tolling of a bell. Some winnings, he realized, cost more than any man could pay. Winter settled over the town like a burial shroud, cold and final and unforgiving. Jake Morrison became a ghost in his own life, walking streets where people crossed to the other side rather than meet his eyes. 3 months had passed since Christmas Eve. 3 months since his world had crumbled like old paper in the fire. The shame had settled into his bones by now, heavy as lead, familiar as his own heartbeat. He worked when he could find it, chopping wood for the widow Prescott, hauling feed for the livery stable, fixing broken things for people who paid him without speaking. The money barely kept him fed, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Food tasted like dust anyway, and sleep came hard to a man who traded his soul for silver. Every morning, Jake stood at his cabin window and watched Eleanor leave her house to tend Samuel's grave. She moved through the world like she was made of spun glass, careful and fragile and heartbreakingly alone. The black dresses were gone now, replaced by simple browns and grays that seemed to shrink her, like grief had worn her down to her essential self. She never looked toward his cabin, never gave him so much as a flicker of acknowledgement. To Eleanor Hartwell, Jake Morrison had died the night she discovered the betting slip. The man who once sat in her kitchen and laughed at her stories, who held her hand during quiet walks and kissed her as though she were something precious, that man had never existed at all. You could leave, Jake told his reflection in the cracked mirror above his washbasin. Pack up Dusty and ride out. Nothing keeping you here. But he knew it wasn't true. Eleanor was here, and no matter the hate in her eyes, he couldn't bear a world where he didn't at least see her face from a distance. Some evenings, when the loneliness grew too heavy, Jake rode to the hill overlooking the cemetery and watched her place flowers on Samuel's grave. She spoke to the headstone sometimes, lips moving in quiet conversations Jake would never hear. Once, she even laughed. A sudden, fragile burst of sound that carried on the wind like music from another life. Those were the moments that gutted him most, when he remembered what it felt like to be the one who made her laugh. Spring crept in reluctantly, as if unsure whether the town deserved another season of hope. Snow melted into muddy rivulets, and the first shoots pushed through hard ground like small miracles. Eleanor planted a garden behind her house, her hands black with earth as she coaxed life from stubborn soil. Watching her work was like watching hope itself take root. Then, in late April, trouble rode into town. 3 men, their horses lathered, their eyes mean. Jake saw them right away for what they were: men running from something and bringing it with them. By morning, word spread. Wells Fargo stage hit 2 towns over, driver shot dead, strongbox gone. Sheriff Dawson was away in Tucson, leaving only a green deputy whose hands shook when he touched his gun. Jake might have ignored it, might have stayed out of other people's fights. But then he saw one of them. Tall, greasy-haired, Wolf smiled, back Eleanor against the general store wall. Her eyes gave her away. Fear, sharp and raw. That night, Jake sat his porch with his rifle laid across his knees, keeping watch until her lamp finally went dark. The next morning, he found her in the garden. For a heartbeat, she looked at him. Not forgiveness, not warmth, but recognition that he was still flesh and blood. Not the ghost she tried to pretend he was. "They've been asking about you," he told her. "Asking about this house." Eleanor paled. She tried to stand tall, but he could see her trembling. "Then I'll lock my doors." "Locks won't stop men like that," Jake said. "They'll kick them down. And there's no law here to stop them." When she refused to flee, he offered the only thing left: himself. A guard she didn't want. A presence she swore she hated. "Why?" she asked at last, her voice breaking with more than fear. "Why would you do this after everything?" Jake's heart tore itself open. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I don't deserve to say it, but it's true. Loving someone means protecting them, even if they hate you for it." She was silent for a long time before whispering, "One night, until the sheriff returns. But you stay outside. And when this ends, you leave me alone. Forever." So Jake laid his bedroll on her porch. She brought him food without a word, her shadow drifting like smoke behind the curtains. And when the midnight hush broke with the sound of boots in the wet dirt, Jake was ready. 3 shadows closed in. He rose, rifle steady. "That's far enough," he called. They froze. The wolf-smiled leader sneered. 3 of us, 1 of you. Maybe so. But the first one moves wrong, he dies. And then came Eleanor's voice from inside, strong and sure, the double click of her shotgun ringing in the night. "Actually, there's 2 of us." The outlaws cursed and backed away, but Jake knew it wasn't over. Not truly. Not until the sheriff came. So he kept his post until dawn, rifle steady, heart aching. When the sun rose, Eleanor brought him coffee. For the first time in months, she sat beside him. Her hands trembled. Her voice was quiet. "Thank you." "They'll be back," Jake said. "I know. And the sheriff won't be home for a week." "I know that too." They sat in silence until Eleanor finally turned to him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love." Jake braced, every nerve taut. "Samuel used to tell me that actions speak louder than words. That you know a man's heart by what he does when no one's watching." Her eyes softened, just a little. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not saying I trust you. But last night, when those men came, you stood between me and danger, even though you knew I hated you for it." Jake swallowed hard, something thawing inside his chest. "I still love you," he whispered. "That won't change." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Love isn't enough. Not by itself. Love without trust is like trying to plant seed in salt ground. Nothing good can grow from it." Jake nodded, accepting the truth of it. "So what do we do?" Slowly, Eleanor met his gaze. For the first time since that Christmas Eve, something flickered there. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. "We start with trust," she said, "and we see what grows from there." So that's the story for today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. On a scale of 10 to 0, How would you rate this story? And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay happy and take care.